When The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom was first announced back in E3 2019, it was with an intriguing trailer featuring a sealed, underground, zombie-like man. A trailer that set fans, theorists and lore aficionados into a frenzy. Perhaps some of the most picked apart 2 minutes in the history of the franchise was ravaged with a fine-toothed comb, squeezed dry for speculation and the wildest of theories. The zombie on the ground, the ceiling spiral, the cave entrance, the luminous stones, the inscriptions on the walls, the castle rising. Not even the ox was exempt from becoming essay material. And somewhere amongst the buzz, many of us were looking at each other, wondering if we thought the same thing. This was all in-game cutscenes. It was story. And for some fans, this was great news. For all of its consistent array of success metrics, be it critical reception or sales numbers, Breath of the Wild discourse was not devoid of fans who thought its story material was a bit of a letdown, with its minimalist approach feeling vapid rather than intriguing. Would this new sequel perhaps turn the tide in favor of those who found Breath of the Wild to be disappointing on the narrative front? 2 years later, another trailer dropped and excitement reached peak. And a year after that, another trailer, now revealing the title, bumped the excitement up, if possible, yet another notch. But it was when trailer number 4 dropped that something else was unraveling itself in a way that threw a wrench of sorts into all the speculation. This was a trailer that showed more gameplay than ever before, and it was not what anyone saw coming. While some fans welcomed homing arrows, skating rails, cannon staffs and skydiving with open arms, other fans had a bit more difficulty unpacking what came next. The car, the crafting, Ultrahand. And it seemed incredibly evident that what Nintendo had been up to the past 6 years was not about writing the enthralling backstory about the zombie man underground, as much as it was about the fact that they've been QAing one of the most intricate and complex game mechanics that this medium had ever seen. An extremely ambitious goal that would become a resounding success, but at the time it felt to many people, Breath of the Wild critics especially, like a bit of a bummer. While theorists had been wrinkling their foreheads investigating lost civilizations, Nintendo had spent an equal amount of time doubling down on Breath of the Wild's playground aspects, seemingly inspired by mad physics and chemistry experiments, rather than old ruins and post-apocalyptic beauty. Was this what was going to happen? Were we about to have our original pre-2023 fantasies undone? Were we going to spend more time gluing stuff together than we would spend time listening to captivating monologues? Were we once again going to be treated to another round of Nintendo's design ethos? Gameplay first. It's been around 7 months since Tears of the Kingdom released, and I've put over 300 hours into it. And the more time I spend with it, the more time I spend thinking about one thing, and one thing only. Tears of the Kingdom is not only a gameplay-first game, it takes the gameplay-first approach and amplifies it as if it had a secret stone attached to its code. Springs, flying planes, rockets, balloon shields and mushroom sticks, all combined to create a sandbox playground that makes Breath of the Wild look like a toned-down, sterile adventure. It sure as hell makes for an experience that is nothing short of tremendous. Ultrahand creates infinite gameplay possibilities that are always a thrill. Whether you fail something spectacularly, pull off a decent contraption, or completely decimate everything in front of you, it's an absolute thrill, unlike anything you've ever seen before. Whether it be in the Zelda series, an open-world adventure game, or even gaming as a whole. You are your own god in this game, and you have the unreal tools of your dreams at your complete disposal. In a sort of like anti-Metroidvania approach, you're not bound by anything. You can create whatever you can dream up and approach any problem with any sort of solution, praying to high heavens that it works, and when it does, It's an unreal feeling of accomplishment. The freedom is intoxicating. It's a rush. It's a complete, unhinged and euphoric rush. Yet it's painstakingly evident that something's gotta give. The Zonaite devices are all created by the Zonaite, who in this game are not the magic-wielding barbarian tribe that we were all led to believe, but timid and humble, godlike rabbit ghosts, descended from the heavens and wielders of magical arms. The disconnect that forms in the narrative tissue is palpable. How could these humble magic wielders be responsible for the creations of badass rockets and cute homing carts? It feels very contrived, in a way that is like a thorn in the side, in the overarching lore of the game. A jarring dissonance that becomes harder to justify the more madcap experiments you undertake. Tears of the Kingdom puts Ultrahand at the forefront, filling its shrines and its overworld with devices to wield and problems to solve. It's gameplay first, and the consistency and logic of the Zonaite seemingly pay the price for it. On an honest personal note, I did not buy into it in the slightest at first. I mean, come on. Did Raro and his people really take the time to not only develop tractor wheels but put them in gumball machines? It's a persistent problem that runs through the narrative of Tears of the Kingdom as a whole. It tries to weave itself around these wild mechanics while telling a somber story about a forgotten godlike race. But it's a balancing act that becomes increasingly harder to keep up the more you play. It often becomes a struggle to connect the game aspect and mechanical intricacies of the game with the story it wants to tell through flashbacks, dialogue, and architecture. But the more I started to think about it all, about the Zonaite, their devices, and Ultrahand, I started to see patterns emerge. I saw dots of sorts, and it became a challenge to connect them. But I did an attempt, and came out on the other side with something. Something small, yet significant. Something to at least try to attempt to clear the itch and bridge the gaps. So, join me as I try to explain. Join me and I'll make an attempt to talk about why I think that Ultrahand, the Zonaite devices, the Dispensers, the energy wells and the Zonaite actually makes more sense than what one might initially think. It all began with the Construct Factory. After completing the quest for the regional phenomena and battling Phantom Ganon, Pura tasks you with finding the fifth sage. It's, bar none, some of my favorite experiences in all of gaming. Solving the riddle on the surface, clearing the thunderclouds, traversing the islands while the rain pours and the serene music hums gently but ominously in the background is one of the highlights of the game. Waiting for you at the end of the questline is a curious mask that asks you to take it to Tobias Hollow's chasm, down into the foreboding depths of Hyrule. Just the name at first immediately gave me goosebumps. Construct Factory. It felt unlike anything in the game, a name containing something bigger than just a name hinting at something beyond its linguistic meaning, a name riddled with lore. Standing around in Hyrule are the constructs, both NPCs and enemies. Enemies that just stands around waiting for the player to approach, and NPCs repeating the same phrase over and over is the most common suspension of disbelief we as players make, something to take for granted as a necessary limitation of the art form. But we still have a habit of searching for the meaning beyond it. Who are you? Why are you here? Why do you attack me? And entering the Construct Factory made me feel like there was an origin behind it all. The constructs came from somewhere. They are made. It all has context and significance. Of course, it becomes apparent that the Construct Factory is mainly the place where Minoru is attempting to gather the parts for her unfinished construct body. As with many places in Tears of the Kingdom, the Construct Factory seems to actively work against trying to make itself a place with coherent logic. It's a very game-centric and dungeon-esque place where the 4 parts are conveniently placed out in 4 corners and needs to be transported back through a set of obstacle courses. But as I transported Mineru's construct parts, I felt an unusual sensation that was a first in the game for me. All of a sudden, I saw these Zonaite devices around me, and they felt like more than just a bunch of mechanics. They felt ancient in a very noticeable way, like they actually were these enigmatic devices that Tears of the Kingdom kept telling me that they were. Wings are set up in a row, wheels are used as conveyor belts, fans are used to propel construct parts upwards, and bigger wheels are being used as hold-ups for doors. In the game, it's very evident that the primary function of the factory is for Mineru's construct body only, but it became increasingly clear to me that perhaps Mineru simply repurposed the construct factory with the help of steward constructs in preparation for her body. This was more than just a trial for me as a player, it was a factory where constructs were being made and transported around the different parts of it using Zonaite devices. Devices that had a practical purpose beyond just acting as tools for problem solving. A place and context in the past history of Hyrule. When you touch what I believe is to be a general Zonaite authorizer switch, you trigger a dispatch mechanism that gives you one of Mineru's construct parts. These dispatch mechanisms are more or less big enough to dispatch containers made for other kinds of constructs as well. The factory has 4 different depots, which would be 2 for forge and steward constructs and 2 for soldier and captain constructs. They were dispatched through the mechanism and transported to different parts of the factory for several stages of an assembly process using Zonaite devices. And both other constructs as well as Hylians were deployed as factory workers. When assembled, the constructs were being transported upwards through the chasms to the surface, where they were deployed to aid and protect the Zonaite, the Hylians, and their kingdom. And Ultrahand is more than just a god mode for the player, it's the very ability that the Zonaite were using to transport different objects around, an ability that was crucial when it came to creating the construct factory, an ability central to their very way of life. It started to hit me more and more, and though a shred of doubt always hung around my brain, I started to experience racing thoughts. Was this the lore behind Ultrahand? Later on in the game, when you're hunting down memories, you see this thing. There, stop right there. That right there, in plain sight, is a Hylian carrying a rocket. After pondering and thinking about the construct factory and what it meant for the lore behind Ultrahand, this hit me. That right there was a rocket. The shrine-cheesing goddamn rocket. And of course. Back when the Zonaite descended from the heavens, when Rauru and Sonia would in due time found the kingdom of Hyrule, the lands were wild and hostile. Who knows what imposing and dangerous creatures would roam the land, threatening what peaceful life forms there were. We knew from Breath of the Wild that there were once giants and leviathans around, and one might suppose that similar threats would be around by the time of Hyrule's founding. And what does a kingdom need more than anything in order to be established? It needs protection. This is where Rauru comes into the picture. With his godlike power, he was more than capable of founding a kingdom able to defend itself. But he was not exactly a warrior. Like the gods that his race were supposedly descended from, the gods that gifted them the secret stones, he was a creator. In order to use his own creativity to protect Hyrule and aid the population in developing a thriving nation, he had to make something. Something that would prove useful for things vital to protection, combat, and traversal. And what's the most common uses of Zonaite devices we see on YouTube and TikTok almost every day? The Zonaite devices were devices created for the Hylians in order to give them the means to survive and build the kingdom of Hyrule. They were gifted cannons and emitters to protect them against and defeat dangerous beasts, wings and sleds to traverse air and snow to scout out new places to build settlements. They were given wheels and hot air balloons for transport, and batteries to further sustain everything that they would build. And in the center of all this is Ultrahand, the sacred power of the Zonaite, a power stored in their arms that made them adept at building. Rauru wielded this power and worked with the Hylians and the constructs to make contraptions for the kingdom that he and Zonia had founded, in order for it to prosper for generations to come. These are tools Nintendo made to allow the player to have heaps of fun, but they were also tools made for a deeper purpose than that. A purpose within the game's story, and by extension, the game's lore. While the Zonaite devices themselves might appear more logical than one might initially think, the fact that they can be extracted from gacha dispensers is another thing that seems to rub against Tears of the Kingdom's sense of cohesion. All over the skies of Hyrule, and partially also on the surface, the player can find dispensers that gives them a random assortment of Zonaite devices when they put Zonaite charges into them. While it's awfully convenient for this part of the game to place these game mechanics right next to the game's challenges, it started to become apparent to me that perhaps they, too, are more than meets the eye. Tears of the Kingdom has its own version of electricity, the green energy of the Zonaite. The two share a lot of similarities. The Zonaite energy is a flow, a current, a stream of pure power capable of astounding feats. From stitching objects together in a way that makes them almost inseparable, to the ability to let autonomous machines operate independently. But unlike electricity, it flows within the very veins of the Zonaite as well, an inseparable part of their magic and the very force that allows them to utilize their supernatural abilities. Abilities that include the powerful force that can move, rotate and stick objects together, Ultrahand. Deep down, in the depths of Hyrule, the Zonaite once found a very curious material, a material called Zonaite. Processing the Zonaite using alchemic procedures, Zonaite can be made into Zonaite charges, external sources of Zonaite energy, suggesting that the green energy of the Zonaite is rich to them, but not exclusive to them. While a Zonaite's own magical power has limits, there's no theoretical end to what Zonaite charges can do, once enough of them has been harvested. So Rauru and the Zonaite's many constructs got to work. The dispensers, like the construct factory, are external machinery that is able to harness pure Zonaite energy and make it into something physical and tangible, in this case, a Zonaite device. From Zonaite charges, the energy goes into the device and the machinery uses it to physically mold tiny capsules containing blueprints of objects. When deployed, the capsules renders a physical manifestation of the blueprints into thin air, using the Zonaite energy to power the calculation. The device dispensers were placed all over the kingdom, where Hyrulean citizens could use charges supplied to them by Rauru and the constructs in order to further expand, build and protect their kingdom using the devices. Sleds and steering sticks for the dispenser near Gerudo Highlands, hydrants for Death Mountain, and cannons and emitters for the dispenser in Necluda to deal with the region's hostile wildlife. Over time, the dispensers were sent up to the distant sky for a seemingly unknown reason, where they would lay forgotten and lost, fading past history, legend, and even myth. Tears of the Kingdom is at times an exhausting game. Going to point A to point B could take tens of hours, as the player would constantly get distracted and get distracted from their distraction and distracted from the distraction that distracted them from their distraction. And this new, multi-layered Hyrule is dense, very dense. Not only in terms of sheer content, but also in terms of the multitude of mechanics and systems underlying and accentuating every facet of exploration. This absurdly imposing gaming experience has a multitude of economical systems in it. Rupees, who are the single economical resource you had at your disposal 38 years ago, are this time accompanied by monster parts, gemstones, Zonaite shard, crystallized shard, energy host, stable bubble, Zonaite, and perhaps a few more things I forgot. Integral to the Zonaite devices and intrinsically connected to Ultrahand are specifically the energy wells, the crystallized charges, and Zonaite. Energy wells are sources powering the Zonaite devices in a wireless transmission of pure energy. They are seemingly a different, much more enigmatic energy source, one that transmits energy to an external device not by flashing a stream of green light, but through thin air, completely invisible to the naked eye. A Zonaite can power Zonaite devices by their own means, by simply using their power. But the devices would be operated by Hylians, so a bit of a conundrum was being presented. How would Hylians be able to operate the devices by themselves? The answer came to Raru through another revelation of alchemy. Being the curious creator that he was, he and the forged constructs returned to Zonaite and examined, researched, and tested seemingly everything on it, until they discovered how it can be processed into Zonaite charges, but also further condensed into crystallized charges. Crystallized charges can be made into energy wells, things that transmits pure energy, not unlike the energy of the Zonaite, into any nearby device within a set radius that is sensitive to picking up energy. A Zonaite device is activated when struck, and it immediately starts to absorb whatever energy source is nearby. If that energy source happens to be an energy well, the Zonaite device will siphon energy from it. Simple but extremely efficient. It's a stunt of miracle, a natural piece of engineering magic, and something that impressed even Raru himself. So the constructs and the Hylians started mining. The absurd amount of Zonaite that could be excavated in the depths was more than enough to grant the Hylians their own energy wells, as they worked to assemble the devices and utilize them for traversal and combat, all in order to protect and expand the kingdom. The conundrum was solved. There was indeed a way for the people of Hyrule to operate the devices on their own, a way involving an energy source that was able to transmit invisible power. The Zonaite was indeed an ore with astounding capabilities, being able to make itself into two separate kinds of energy sources. It was a revelation of sorts, that sometimes the world is simply much more than we can grasp, and we have to accept it. But there was another use of Zonaite, completely separate to all of this. Another use that, when it was discovered, blew everyone away. Autobuild is an ability that allows players to store the memory of things they have built and instantly recreate them from a list of either history, schematics, or favorites, sometimes at the expense of a set number of Zonaite. What's astounding about this ability is that it does not simply pull out nearby objects and assemble them. If the nearby objects doesn't exist, it simply conjures them out of thin air. Out of all of the aspects and parts of this entire Ultrahand saga, Autobuild is by far the most baffling and mysterious. This is partly due to it being simply the most gaming-oriented aspect, the one that is there because Aonuma, Dota, and Fuibayashi thought that it would be more convenient for it to exist in order to ensure smoother gameplay. And the one that goes the farthest into Tears of the Kingdom's main issue, the way it actively tries to nullify its world building by grinding it hard against its mechanics. But we've come so far in trying to make sense of Ultrahand and everything surrounding it that there's no stopping now. Autobuild predates the founding of Hyrule. It was an ability discovered by the Zonaite race after their first forage into the depths and the discovery of Zonaite. It's an incredibly powerful ability that works in astonishing ways, and it intrigued the mighty Zonaite when they combined their arm powers with the power of Zonaite and found something marvelous. Autobuild not only allowed the Zonaite to work with multiple objects at once, it also uses Zonaite to conjure up parts out of nowhere. It's incredible when thinking about it, but the reality is that it's simply yet another property of Zonaite. Being in possession of Zonaite automatically grants a Zonaite's Autobuild ability the means to channel itself and manifest into any kind of object. It's a mysterious process that is the merge of two extraordinary powers. The more Zonaite is being used, the more large and complex objects can be materialized. In theory, maybe 1 million Zonaite pieces can be channeled to conjure up a copy of the Temple of Time itself. The only requirement that Autobuild seemingly requires from its wielder is for them to commit what they want to build to memory. That means saving your history to your favorites or building them from schema stones. As such, the Zonaite seek to commit vehicles and weapons to memory and write them down on schema stones. These stones were passed on to each other, used to share ideas and concepts. Once an invention had been looked at and its exact composition had been committed to memory, it would be able to be recreated with Autobuild. And if there were one or more parts missing, the arm would draw energy from Zonaite to combine itself with the ore of the depths to compensate for the missing objects. A simple and elegant solution for the Zonaite to optimize and fine-tune their ability to create marvelous and intricate contraptions. The Zonaite were said to be descended from gods, with their divine and extraordinary power of creativity. Using this power, as well as utilizing the common ore of the depths, the devices that Rauru had created were of great use when it came to establishing the kingdom that came to be known as Hyrule. And at the center of it all lay the very ability to piece these devices together into contraptions made for traversal and combat, Ultrahand. The devices, the dispensers they came from, the energy wells and the Zonaite, might be game mechanics made for the player's enjoyment at its core, but we as players can still be able to see behind Nintendo's design ethos and look at what's really going on. Piecing together the devices, the abilities, and all of the resources, and connect the dots in an honest attempt to make sense of it all, we can wage a battle against Tears of the Kingdom's continuing attempts to bury its own lore beneath a bunch of shrine-cheesing rockets. So, thank you so much for watching the video. This is my very first Zelda theory thing attempt. I'm not sure if I should do more. I'm just testing the waters a little bit and see how it goes and stuff. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts, so let me know in the comment section below what you think about Tears of the Kingdom's lore. That would be really interesting to read. So, goodbye.